Day 226 of the Ukrainian war map, also known as Russia's despicable invasion of Ukraine. Juzzy here, and today is another quick update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine today. And as always, I like to start off with some of those Russian losses in terms of military personnel and hardware losses. So in the last 24-hour reporting period up to the 7th of October, there has been an additional 350 Russian military personnel losses. Then when we scoot down just a bit here, we'll have a look at the hardware losses. Now, never a dull day anymore. Long gone are the days of maybe one or two or even three perhaps. So for instance, armored combat vehicles, a whopping additional 29 losses on the Russian side. Then we have a look at tanks, truly a massive, when we're talking about tanks, a massive 17 additional losses for the Russian outfit there, and quite a large number of artillery there as well. Now, there were some aircrafts, particularly some choppers there that I might mention there shortly, but we'll start off and move back to the map here. And we'll start out potentially a little bit on the outside of the map, so at Belarus today, where a Russian Tu-22 bomber launched a Kh-22 missile from the Belarusian airspace against the Melnitsky region, which you'll have to zoom in to find that one there. Melnitsky. Okay, there it is, and they did this today, and it's the first time since an attack in August at this location. So recently, the Belarusian president, Lukashenko, allowed Putin and Russia to stage some additional military personnel and equipment on the Belarusian side, letting the Russian forces attack Ukraine from his own country. But certainly history will not look kindly upon Lukashenko as well. Oh, and the Kh-22 missile that was used by the Russian forces here, it's not the first time Russia has pulled out these old missiles from their warehouses or stockpiles. This one's actually 60 years old. In fact, a little bit of a clip here, as you can see, or rather just some stats or data, produced in 1962. So the world's second most capable army using some really old equipment. It just doesn't add up, does it? Then we'll move across quickly to the Kharkiv region, where it's mostly been liberated here. In fact, if we zoom into just south of Kupiansk, we have the settlement of Podoli that was liberated there. And that was just in the last 24 hours. So as you can see, if we use the date map, it's really pushing ahead through to Petropavlivka for really to surround it, outflank it, and liberate it officially. Oh, and also in terms of loot in this region, or spoils of war, a Russian T-72 tank was also captured in good condition as well for upcoming use by the Ukrainian forces shortly into the future, I am sure. Then we'll move across to the Donbass region, where Ukrainian forces continue to consolidate recent gains and regroup around the Lerman area, which was recently liberated right down there at the bottom. And in this region here, Kreminna and Svatov, so we've got Kreminna there to the south and Svatov there a little bit more north, are now the main targets in this region. And when you use the date map here again, so I'll zoom out and I'll show you, there was 2 changes in the last 24 hours. So you can really see at this location here, in fact, the Makivka was liberated. And here's a photo for that one there as well. And basically, quite the push, where the Ukrainian armed forces will undoubtedly start to control the highway that effectively connects Kreminna and Svatov quite soon, I suspect. And you may barely notice it because there is a bit of grey, blue and red here, but it's actually on the border of Kharkiv and Luhansk here. So that means the Ukrainian armed forces are really starting to liberate Luhansk and settlements within there, and they'll continue to do so, which would serve as quite the embarrassment for Russia and Putin, who've held these lands here since, for very many months now. And some recently intercepted Russian communications in this area pretty much show the reason for the Ukrainian forces' success in the last day or two here. Effectively, these interceptions state that Russia's manpower is still very limited in these particular areas, so potentially in some of these key strategic Russian hubs like the Svatov and the Kreminna I've mentioned, we'll see the Ukrainian forces push even further and further east past these settlements, much further into the Luhansk region. In other words, the Ukrainian armed forces appear to be getting very good at breaking Russian defensive lines, or weak points, if you will, and then overrunning the location with the Ukrainian forces. It's incremental, but it's effective. I would say it's incremental up to a certain point where they break the defensive lines and there's no Russian fortifications behind that, and the Ukrainian forces just push really deep, just like they did in Kharkiv recently. And down in the south as well. Now again, in terms of loot or spoils of war, the Ukrainian forces, I've got this video here of a Ukrainian soldier inspecting captured Russian 152mm artillery shells. And really, to follow that up, there's been a news report now that says Ukraine is no longer low on artillery ammo because Russia has just simply abandoned so much of it in recent retreats. And speaking of Russia abandoning military goods, we have this photo here of another T-80BV tank of the Russian army that was captured by the Ukrainian forces. And yet another Russian Ka-52 helicopter was downed in the northern Donbass front line here, which is unfortunately getting all too common for Russia to send choppers to the front line where it's taken down by some sort of a manpad or a Stinger, whatever the case may be. Then we'll move across on the map to the Zaporizia region. Actually, this is Nikopol, which looks like Zaporizia, but is in fact part of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast, where the Russian army continues to shell Nikopol with heavy artillery and MLRS. So these are Russian multiple launch rocket systems like the Smerch. They can be real blockbusters, but actually not that accurate. Now, ideally, if you're using these MLRS systems, you might want to use them for instance, more open fields that contain multiple enemy stationary artillery systems to sort of carpet bomb the region, for instance. But here instead, we have abandoned residential homes because of the war. Now, really talking about Zaporizia for real this time, Russia continues to send Shahed kamikaze drones overnight to this location. And some reports are basically now saying these days that these strikes are designed really just to strike fear into the civilian populations, as opposed to being any real and actual military target. And there are actually some approximate figures that came out that said that Russia has used about 50% of their Iranian-produced kamikaze drones, for instance, there. And that's pretty much in line with a very rough guess that I've been having over the recent weeks to month or so when they first received them. Then we'll move across down to the Kherson region, where the Ukrainian forces are advancing further into the Kherson Oblast, making it as far as about 20 miles in several directions along the front line, particularly the north side there. Now, the Ukrainian forces also continue to prioritize crossings over the river. So we've got the Dnipro River here, the north bank where is the front line, and the Antonivsky Bridge and the Novokakhovka Dam Bridge. And prioritizing by striking them, said to be cutting off any escape route for the retreating soldiers. And on that topic, there is a photo of information about a Russian military column in Novokakhovka. So this is on the south side of the bridge right there. So you've got trucks and logistics and things that appear to be just stationed there. They can't drive over the bridge there because of the state and condition that it's in. I've covered that a lot on the channel in the past. It continually gets struck by HIMARS, for instance, so it's just not usable for anything more than a footbridge. So it's not yet clear what this Russian military column is intending to do. Perhaps they were instructed by their commanders just to go to the front line and supply. And the Russian forces themselves are in a bit of a pickle at the moment. So, for instance, the infantry, the truck drivers, that sort of thing, they really can't be seen to be rejecting their own commander's orders for fear of jail or to be considered some sort of mutiny. So, in other words, they're going as far as they can go, from what it seems. But not far enough. Now, speaking of Russian commanders, I hear this a lot, but I don't normally mention it on the channel. So, see this town here? Snurivka. Now, first thing I'll mention is if you look at the oblast lines, it's actually in the Mykolaiv Oblast there. But as soon as it started to get hit pretty hard by the Ukrainian forces, the Russian commanders fled and went towards Novokakhovka. So across the river to a safer side, basically. And it's not the first time I've heard this story. So they leave their soldiers behind or leave their soldiers at the front line. There's less communication. There's no one with a great deal of strategy to implement some sort of Russian offensive. It's just a hard time all around. Countless Russian call intercepts saying that their lieutenants, commanders, field officers, things like that have just left them. And we're in Kherson, so another day, another T-62 abandoned tank here. Now, this one is some video footage of just an abandoned T-62. And the word here says Slava Ukraine in Ukrainian, which of course means glory to Ukraine. And yet another T-62 captured in Kherson. So there's just a photo for that one. And again, yet another one caught or captured. That last one with a weird looking cope cage. Now, I've said it a million times on this channel at this point, the Russian forces seem to put a lot of older tanks and equipment on this south side offensive, as they weren't really expecting much of a fight, and they put all their new stuff on the north side in the Kharkiv Oblast and regions there, because they were expecting, I guess, to be closer to the Donbass, or I wouldn't necessarily say more of a fight. They did not expect the counteroffensive in Kharkiv. Well, you know what? In fact, I'll just try to not understand the Russian logic in all of this today. And lastly on the map, Odessa. So we have there's some information here about 3 more Shahid drones were shot down over Odessa. There's some pretty decent air defenses here in Odessa at the moment as well. Then we'll move across to some news where the US President Joe Biden has said that Putin is not joking. This is a quote. Putin is not joking when he talks about potential use of technical nuclear weapons or biological and chemical weapons, because his military is, you might say, significantly underperforming. I think Biden just called Putin a bad loser. And we'll move on to some more news in some Russian mobilization news. So, in the Russian region of Altai, not a single man could be mobilized because the men simply did not show up for their summonses. Now, this is in the very, very east of the country, in the Siberian region, where the ethnic minorities in this region have been disproportionately affected by the recent partial mobilization and call up there. But it turns out none of them showed up. Think of all the extra Russian man forces and equipment needed to enforce mobilization call-ups, which would be hard to do. There has been a lot of jokes on the internet saying that these drafting commentaries have actually already been conscripted and gone into the front lines of the war. So yeah, not a great mobilization by any means. And in some other related mobilization news, local Russian officials appear to be frantically looking for ways to fund their mobilized units. That's been requested as the Kremlin, so the Russian political apparatus, increasingly expects local administrators to pay for the war efforts from their own budgets. Now, unfortunately for the conscripts that don't put up a fight, so to speak, and accept the draft and go ahead, they've a lot of the time got to get their own equipment. So we're talking winter gear, sleeping bags, and gloves there as well. So there's lots of footage online of these Russians that have been called up for the draft. They're sometimes 40, 50, some of them even look 55 and 60. They're going to the army stores and the camping supply stores, and they're saying that all the hot ticket items, like those sleeping bags and gloves, are just completely sold out. Just imagine being called up by your own country to go to war, and then they say, oh, one thing, you've got to provide your own stuff. That's just embarrassing, really. And in some other news, Russian President Vladimir Putin, this is actually from a bit of an inside leak, is said to no longer tell his ministers about his plans and faces criticism in his inner circles. Basically, he's stopped to consult with all ministers and doesn't inform them of his plans. And this was actually reported through a Russian media outlet, citing an unnamed source close to the Kremlin. Now, down the bottom in every description area of my videos, I say many things, but yeah, right down the bottom it does say we've got an increasingly isolated and unaware Putin. And then a few funnies to round off the day with here. So this first one is Canadian protesters holding a quote-unquote referendum to annex the Russian embassy in Ottawa. Just hilarious. Now, this is an old stomping ground of mine some time ago. The Russian embassy is on Charlotte Street there, and if you look at Google Street Maps, I just checked this before doing the video, you'll zoom into the embassy and you'll see like a bike locked to a pole there, a blue and yellow Ukrainian colored flag bike. Not completely dissimilar to a washing machine that was left at the Russian embassy in Finland as well, about 2 months ago. In fact, I bet if I checked every street view of every Russian embassy in every major country's capital in the world, I'm probably going to find a few more instances like this as well. Check your own. And in another funny, we have some footage, and this is just photos at the moment. I apologize, but basically Russian soldiers living in barns with pigs. So this was found out after the liberation of some areas there. Oh, and not just pigs, but a washing machine as well, too, that you can see here. So, yeah, they living with pigs and got their washing machines. Truly the Russian spoiled of war. White goods. And just lastly today, a bit of a last quick funny. So it wouldn't be a celebrated birthday for Putin without burning an effigy of the man on a hill. So Putin's birthday is in fact today, October the 7th, and he is now officially 70 years old. Interestingly enough, this footage was taken by a pro-Ukrainian inside of Luhansk, just north of the city. So dangerous location to do so, but ballsy, so, good for them. So thanks for watching, guys. Yeah, please leave a comment, subscribe, like. This video is a little bit shorter today, particularly on the news side of things. And yeah, I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.